we've been studying the book of Daniel. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 5 today. Daniel chapter 5. And we're going to be looking at Belshazzar's feast. Beginning in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 5, it says, King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So, clay tablets from a historical standpoint, because confusion has existed for many years over who Belshazzar actually was. And skeptics have magnified this as another reason to undermine this book. Again, archaeologists have uncovered evidence, these clay tablets, which proves the historical accuracy of not only this, but of many things that we read about in the Bible. And clay tablets, again, have been discovered which refer to Belshazzar as the son of Nabonidus. Nabonidus. This would make Belshazzar the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, since Nabonidus was married to his daughter. And it was quite common in biblical days for a grandson or even a great-grandson to refer to some illustrious member of his lineage as father. So many times when you read in Scripture father, it could mean the direct father, or it could be a descendant. It could be a grandfather, a great-grandfather. And that's what it is here in this case. When you get down to verse 11, there is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And so again, you see where Nebuchadnezzar is Belshazzar's grandfather, but they're referring to him as father. And after Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BC, the Babylonian Empire experienced a very rapid decline. His son, Evil-Merodach, you read about him in 2 Kings chapter 25, ascended to the throne. But he only reigned for a very short time. He reigned from about 562 to 560 BC, so he only lasted a couple years. Neriglissar, a brother-in-law, assassinated Evil-Merodach and then reigned for 4 years from 560 to 556. He was assassinated as well. And so you see all of these assassination attempts. Then Labashi-Merodach became the head for 9 months when he was deposed by the priestly party, and Nabonidus, a former Babylonian priest under Nebuchadnezzar, was then appointed king of the empire. And Nabonidus reigned for 17 years. And near the end of his reign, he made his firstborn son, Belshazzar, co-regent. And so obviously Belshazzar was the number 2 ruler of the empire here. And this explains why he offered to make Daniel the 3rd ruler. When you look down at verse 16 of chapter 5, but I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. So again, Belshazzar is number 2, and he's willing to make Daniel number 3. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But Nabonidus, his father, is evidently away at this time, which is why Belshazzar is running things. And in verse 2, you can see where he's like a young show-off. Because what is he doing? What do you notice in verse 2?
Old vessels?
Yeah, throwing a party. Yeah, look at what I have. We're going to throw a party here. So again, he's showing off all of these things. And he ordered that they drink from the sacred vessels which Nebuchadnezzar had earlier taken from Jerusalem. And you can read about that in 2 Kings chapter 24 and 25. And so they desecrated, is what they did. They desecrated these holy vessels, not only by removing them from their ordained purpose, but they were further profaned when they were used to praise these gods of Babylon. And so he's just showing off. Look what I have, look what I can do. My Father's not here, and so it's time to party. Well, verses 5 through 9, notice what happens, and this is where we get a phrase that we hear today. Beginning in verse 5, immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. All right, so what saying do we get today from this? You see the handwriting on the wall. That's exactly right. We've all heard that before. And this is where it comes from. And Belshazzar, when he sees these fingers and this human hand writing, what happens to him? He gets scared. The Bible says that his color changed. He begins to tremble, and it even says his knees knocked together. It terrified him, as it would any of us. And so in a panic, he sees this hand writing on the wall. He's terrified, and so he sends for the wise men of his kingdom to interpret the writing. And so out of desperation to know the meaning, he offers great rewards. If you can interpret this, no matter who you are, if you can interpret this, you will be third in this kingdom. However, how many of them could interpret it? None. Not a single one. Which gets us to verses 10 through 16. Lost my place. Where am I? Here we go. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers. Because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation." Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they cannot show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. The queen here, notice we're talking about a queen. The queen comes into the banquet hall, and it must not have been one of Belshazzar's wives who were already in the banquet room. Notice it says she came in. Perhaps the queen was his own mother, the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. And so she comes in. And she described Daniel in the manner of one who was well informed and had a great relationship with Nebuchadnezzar. And so she's familiar with all of this. And when Daniel was brought before the king, again, the same offer is given to Daniel. If you can interpret this, then you will be third in the kingdom. Does Daniel take him up on that offer? Let's find out. Beginning in verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself." Daniel is not interested in anything. He doesn't care about being the third ruler of the kingdom. He doesn't care about any of it. And he says, "And give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of mankind, and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. And you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored." Again, Daniel was not interested in this offer. It was later given to him in verse 29, but it really was a worthless reward. Why? What happened that night? Do you remember?
No more kingdom.
No more kingdom. That's exactly right. The kingdom fell. The kingdom fell. And Daniel was willing to give the interpretation because this was a clear announcement of what was going to happen. So Daniel's like, listen, I don't care about the reward because things are going to happen and it's not going to matter anyway. This kingdom is going to fall. And again, it came as a direct judgment from God himself. When it comes to verses 18 and 19, again, history records Nebuchadnezzar was a great man. Daniel reveals that his greatness was made possible by God. But what was it that brought about the fall of Nebuchadnezzar? Do you remember? Talked about it last week. That's exactly right. His pride. Remember what he said? Look at what I have accomplished. Look at my kingdom. Look at everything that I have done. And what did God do about that? Took him down, literally took him down. So now you have a king, this powerful man, who is now out in the fields getting fed grass, and he's living like an ox. He's living with donkeys. And he needed to be humbled. And that humbled him. And do you remember when Nebuchadnezzar, when he finally recognized God as the Most High, what happened?
He was scared, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. He came back, and he definitely, after that, recognized God as the Most High. Belshazzar knew all of this. He wasn't ignorant. He knew his grandfather and what his grandfather had said. He knew his grandfather had talked about the one true God, the God of the Most High. And he knew that his grandfather went mentally checked out for a while. He knew all of this, but he ignored it. His own arrogance led him to commit similar dishonor to the Lord by defiling the holy vessels and using them to praise idols. So he didn't learn a lesson from history. Sound familiar? Yeah. Even today, we can look at history and we can say, if we do this, this is going to happen. But yet we do it anyway, thinking that the outcome is going to be different. And that's why we always talk about how history repeats itself. You see, even back in the time of Daniel, thousands of years ago, same thing. You don't learn from history. You think, the outcome's going to be different. History repeats itself. And that's what we have even today. And so we get to the interpretation of this dream. Verse 24, then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And so again, that very night, what Daniel had said was going to happen, happened. So again, do you see why Daniel did not care at all about the purple and the necklaces and all of this being third in the kingdom? Why bother? It's all going to be taken tonight. And it did. It did. Belshazzar honored his promise of rewards, and Daniel allowed him to show some integrity in keeping his word, although, again, the gifts didn't mean anything to Daniel. And on that night,
In 538
BC, Belshazzar was killed, and Babylon fell to the Medes and the Persians. And that was the fulfillment of this prophecy. Not only Daniel's, but also that which Isaiah had prophesied this about 175 years earlier, that this was going to happen. You can read about that in Isaiah chapter 13, 14, 21, as well as 47. You read about the fall of Babylon. So, such an easy victory for the Medes and the Persians seemed impossible because the city of Babylon, nobody thought, again, sound familiar? Nobody thought that Babylon could fall. It was impossible for Babylon to fall because the wall that surrounded the city was 350 feet high and 85 feet thick. Think about that. An 85-foot thick wall at 350 feet high. That is a massive, massive wall. So if you had a wall that was 85 feet thick, do you think anybody is going to break through that? Absolutely not. So who can come in and take over? Who's going to control us? That's impossible. However, just to show you how thick it was, 6 chariots could race side by side. That's how thick that wall was. Cyrus devised some brilliant military strategy. You see, the Euphrates River ran through the city, but the bottom of the wall was flush with the surface of the water. So Cyrus went upstream some distance where he diverted the water into an artificial pond which drained the riverbed, which meant what? They could just march right into the city. You see? Smart man. Smart man. Once inside the city, the army still faced walls along each side of the river, but I guess perhaps due to Belshazzar's party taking place at the time, and people were being invited to come party, the gates, what do you think the gates were? Gates were open because everybody's being invited in. So how could anybody, but one who was inspired, guess, one, the name of the individual king, or two, that the doors would be open? Isaiah prophesied this again 175 years before. Look at Isaiah chapter 45. In Isaiah chapter 45, verses 1 through 5. Again, this is roughly 175 years before this happened. In Isaiah 45, beginning of verse 1, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other besides me. There is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me." So you see there, Isaiah, 175 years before, says that a man named Cyrus is going to march through open gates and take over. So who other than someone who is inspired be able to say something like that? You think it was a lucky guess? No. So again, Isaiah said that this was going to happen, and the exact identification of this Darius the Mede, from what I see, is kind of debatable. But the strongest argument seemed to be that he fits the description of a man commonly referred to in various 6th century BC texts with the name of Gubaru. I know that's a weird name, but he should definitely not be confused with Darius, who later ruled over Persia from 521 to 486. But again, here's this man, Cyrus the Great, was the universal ruler of this new empire, which was called the Persian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire is done, and now you come into the Persian Empire. Cyrus appointed Darius to be ruler over this province. And so I want to end with this thought question. In what sense can we be weighed in the balances, if you will, as a Christian?
How can we be weighed in the balances as a Christian? Anybody?
Yes, I would say the river right by there speak for me.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
In Daniel chapter 5 and verse 27, it says tekel, which means you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. I think that all men all men will be weighed in the balances in the sense that we're all going to face judgment, aren't we? We're all going to face judgment. We should continually search ourselves. Otherwise, we find ourselves wanting. We're always finding ourselves wanting by the manner we have used our talents, our time, our tongues. Again, we seem to be found wanting, but we are all going to stand before God, and we're going to be judged. Any thoughts or comments on Daniel chapter 5? All right. We're going to move on to Daniel chapter 6, and we're going to look at the jealousy of the wise men and the decree of Darius. So when you get to Daniel chapter 6, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the presidents and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against us, Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document, so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. All right, so what we have here is these men become very jealous of Daniel. Why is that?
Because of his authority, his promotions.
His promotions, right? Again, we see that in this day and time.
And maybe some of you have worked at jobs where you've been promoted, and all of a sudden you see people trying to pick and poke, and, well, they did this and they did that, because they become jealous that they didn't get the promotion. And so you see these men doing this. And they tried to find something on Daniel. And you better believe they worked hard to try to find something on Daniel. What did they find? Nothing. That says a lot about Daniel, doesn't it? They couldn't find that he made a mistake. They couldn't find that he did something wrong, said something wrong, could not find anything. So what did they decide to do? They knew his faith, right? And so what better way to get him against the king than to use his faith against him? And so they go to the king and they say, "Listen, we think you should come up with this decree that if anyone worships any other god except for you, then they should be thrown into the lion's den." They knew Daniel. They knew that Daniel would not have any part of this. And so when the king signs this, they set Daniel up. And so Daniel, they think that they have got him. We just set him up. There's no way Daniel is going to worship this guy. He's going to stick to his God, and so we've got him. But again, they decide to use the king and use him to trap Daniel. And notice again, have you noticed how they flatter Darius? Have you noticed how these wise men, and they always go to the king, and they always flatter the king. They flatter him, and then they bait his enlarged ego by suggesting that he issue this decree that will last for 30 days. That's it, 30 days. And again, if you didn't obey it, you're going to be thrown into the lion's den. But Daniel, again, gave thanks before God as he had done previously. Daniel, from a young man, he still has not changed. He has not changed. When you get to verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. So Daniel, he hears about this decree. He goes, and not only does he go into his room to pray, but where does he pray at? Right in the open windows. How many of us would do that? How many of us, if there was something, if somebody said, if you are going to pray or if you're going to worship to any other person other than the king, then you're going to be thrown into a lion's den. Who's going to go on their front lawn and bend down and pray? Who's going to go in an open window? Are you going to have your blinds pulled down and, make sure you do it privately? He did it where everybody can see it. And again, when you think about his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were threatened with a furnace. That would terrify any of us. Now the threat is of lions. And having worked directly with lions before, when I worked at Disney, they're massive. They're ferocious. A lot different than when you see them on TV. And I'm sure those of you who have been to a zoo and you've seen lions, they're just muscular, powerful, and terrifying. And you can hear them. When they start roaring in the morning, you can hear them all over. It's just a powerful animal. And now you're going to be put into a den full of them. Again, terrifying. It was a respectful fear, but there was still that fear, even though they were behind bars, and I'm dealing with them. It was just, they're just a powerful animal. And so I don't know if any of you would want to be put into a lion's den with the fear of being torn apart. It's just not a good thought. But again, Daniel does what his friends did. Says, I don't care. I don't care. I'm going to do this anyway. Daniel's loyalty to God took first place above anything else, even death. And again, how are we with that? Daniel was just like us. When something is thrown our way, do we put God first or do we cave into the pressure? Do we cave into the fear? This is one of my favorite stories in all of the Bible, and it's a story that you learn as a child, Daniel in the lion's den. One of my favorite stories. And so we'll pick up there, Lord willing, next Sunday.